Martin hates boats. Martin hates water. Martin sits in his car when we go on the ferry to the mainland. I guess it's a childhood thing. There's a clinical name for it, isn't there?
Drowning. Jaws.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses. Today's episode goes out to one of our active members on our Discord channel, Flint, who is a horror author and specifically requested we cover something terrifying this month. So we narrowed it down to Jurassic Park and Jaws. We did a lot of stuff so far that was all in that same time slot that Jurassic Park was, so we'll do Jaws today. We do have the creature horror, the monster horror, and I feel like Jaws is a great example of less is more in this particular category.
I watched this for this episode, and if I had ever seen it, it was a really long time ago, kind of before I have memories of sitting down and watching movies. And I have to tell you, this moved so slowly. I was baffled by how slow the pacing was for this entire movie.
Yeah, I think part of that for me was the plot structure, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that 2-act really just threw off my internal rhythm, so I didn't quite know if we were almost done or if we were just getting started or where it was in that. But it was definitely a different era, which is good for us to study as well.
So let's get into our main topics for breaking down all of this. I think one of the places that Jaws excels with is the character creation side of things. You have very defined characters who play very defined roles within the story.
One of the things that I found most interesting about how they used these characters is how they named them. And yes, I'm aware that this was a book initially, but the names of the characters are very commonplace. You've got Brody, you've got Ellen, you've got Martin, you've got Quint, you've got Hooper, Vaughn. These are all very straightforward, everyday names, which I think was done so that it would feel like we were one of them. It was the opposite of the chosen one trope where this person is special. It was more of a this could happen to anyone, which is key in naming characters, especially for horror stories.
They also never really named the shark. It wasn't anything like you would see in Moby Dick where they had the white whale and a very special designation for this very special creature. More modern shark tales you could look at would be the Meg. But leaving it anonymous really leaned into an aspect of horror where the less we know about it, the more it scares us. If you look at what happened after Jaws, culturally, there was a huge spike in fear of sharks.
I think the one name that really stands out to me, mostly because I have that dark sense of humor, is the name of the island, was Amity Island. The name means friendship and nice things and, oh, let's all get together and sing Kumbaya, which is the exact opposite of the mood they're going for not only the movie as a whole, but the island culture in particular. So that one was a little snarky, which made me very entertained.
And then if we look at who the characters are and what role they played in the story, you have Brody, who is very clearly the main character. He's the one who had the arc where he started out afraid of the water, and then through the story, we see his arc growing to where he recognizes that there is a worse thing out there than the water itself, and we need to conquer this. I need to conquer my fear in order to protect everybody on the island.
I think it's interesting that they chose to have the main character right off the bat, lots of tertiary characters right off the bat, but where the cast changed the most was that group of secondary characters. The way the numbers changed throughout the story was fascinating, especially during that first half. You've got as many tertiary characters as you could literally cram into a movie, which gets counterbalanced by the eerie silence of the second half of the film. So how they used just numbers of characters and when they recurred This is an interesting study in structuring a story with quantities of bodies on the screen.
And then we can look at the characters' choice of words, their dialogue. There is a very clear difference in the words and the language everybody uses. You have the scientist, Hooper, obviously shark expert. He's using a lot of technical terms. You have the captain of the boat in the second half of the movie, who is very rough around the edges, uses just a little bit more language and slang. And then you have the main character who is in the middle, where he's not super fancy like the scientist, but he's not seafaring slang like the captain.
Something else I found interesting as far as how they used dialogue, and this is kind of a directing choice as well, was how they used silence. Silence is one of those unsung heroes of really well-written dialogue. So in the town hall scene, there was almost no silence. There was a lot of energy, there were a lot of people shouting over each other, there were lots of things happening. And then we have the awkward dinner scene, which was what our quote was from at the beginning of the episode. And the silence, even like no music, just the characters waiting to talk and then not, and then back and forth, was very potent. And it told so much more than any of the dialogue could with how they use silence. So this is, especially during the first half, a great way to study rhythm of dialogue.
And this is something that can be difficult to translate to the page. But you have formatting that you can work with where you can break up those paragraphs, make something a little bit longer or shorter, depending on what you need and how you need the reader to interact with it.
We've teased to this a couple of times, but the plot structure, I think, is really what fascinated me most about this movie. You don't really see a lot of two-act structure in film. Mostly you see that theatrically because you've got the intermission where everyone goes for snacks. This one had that midpoint choice that everything turned upside down. All of the noise became silence, all of the land became ocean, the massive amount of tertiary characters became just a couple of secondary characters. Everything turned on its head as they set out to sea.
And I think that's part of why the pacing felt a little bit weird to me, because I'm not used to a two-act structure. But it worked very well for this. And then you also have a little bit of a murder mystery style story told here, rather than the hero's journey structure that you might expect with him leaving home. And then in the murder mystery, we have the killer is introduced first, and then all of these other elements of, well, maybe it was this shark that these people caught, but no, it couldn't be. And then this cat and mouse game that the shark plays with them.
Yeah, that introduction of the hero after the introduction of the villain, especially that prologue style of the first murder happening, is very signature of the murder mystery structure. And then the ticking clock, the reason for the characters to hurry through to the conclusion of the story, is, will the bad guy kill again? That will they kill again is, again, very signature of that murder mystery style.
You also have this very interesting thing with the backstory of most of the characters, particularly Brody, that it isn't fully introduced until about 3/4 of the way through the movie.
Another interesting thing about the backstory and the way it's introduced is the captain's backstory and how they ended up having him tell his own backstory. The purpose in it wasn't to actually give the character's backstory. It was to go, sharks are scary all around the world, not just around Amity Island. It was an interesting choice. I'm not sure I agree with it, but I see why they did it.
And really, it was part of the world building, not just giving us context of the characters and why he is so particular about hunting sharks, but gives us an insight into the world of Jaws, where sharks are much scarier than they are in real life, even though it's set supposedly in real life.
I really feel like they made an effort to make this feel as close to real life as possible, as close to random and anonymous and could be anyone as possible. With the character names and the location was pretty clearly Martha's Vineyard, which is an island in that corner of the world. And even though they named it something fake, it all felt almost like you could expect to see this on the news. It could have been part of this world, and that's just how it is. There's nothing you can do about it.
I also think they did a particularly good job through the course of the movie introducing and explaining the power balance that was at play in this island. Immediately, we know about Brody, his title, his rank, his purpose there, and that he is going head-to-head against the mayor or the city officials. And we immediately get this insight that we see play out through the whole movie of a power struggle between protecting and maintaining the island.
As far as the overall storytelling technique, I think we've talked about the weirdness of the 2-act structure. If that's what you're going for, it definitely felt off-kilter the whole time. So that can be very useful in a horror-type story. But my favorite thing about their overall storytelling is that the monster could just be a monster.
I like stories like this, like Jaws, where the monster is just a monster because they're a monster. There doesn't need to be an explanation. It is just a shark, and it is just that shark's nature.
Next episode, we are going from our oldest movie in the collection, Jaws, to one of our newest, and that is Welcome to Marwen. It is dealing with a very different kind of monster, so if you get a chance, watch that. Be aware there are some adult themes. It is PG-13, so there's nothing too grotesque. But at least read a synopsis if you've got some sensitive younger listeners listening with you today.
And until next time.
Right, selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.